This is called The Cord, and I wrote this poem when I was about 17, and I wrote it for my mother because I was a bit of an unruly teenager, and it was a tribute and a thank you to her. So, The Cord. I used to lie on the floor for hours after school, with the phone cradled between my shoulder and my ear, a plate of cold rice to my left, my school books to my right. Twirling the cord between my fingers, I spoke to friends who recognized the language of our realm. Throats and lungs swollen, we talked into the heart of the night, toying with the idea of hair dye and suicide, about the boys who didn't love us, who we loved too much, the pang of the nights. Each sentence was new territory, a door someone was rushing into, the glass shattering with delirium, with knowledge and fear. My mother never complained about the phone bill, what it cost for her daughter to disappear behind a door, watching the cord stretching its muscle away from her. Perhaps she thought it was the only way she could reach me, sending me away to speak in the underworld. As long as I was speaking, she could put my ear to the tenuous earth, allow me to listen, to decipher. And these were the elements of my mother, the earthed wire, the burning cable, as if she flowed into the room with me to somehow say, "Stay where I can reach you, the dim room, the dark earth. Speak of this, and when you feel removed from it, I will pull the cord and take you back towards me." My second collection of poetry is called The Hag of Beara on Cailleach Beara, and there's a rock on the Beara Peninsula where I'm from which is supposed to be the petrified remains of the hag or the Cailleach, and she was, in pre-Christian times, she was more of a goddess. They say she used to carry stones in her apron and set them down in piles along the coast, and that's why we have the very rough and rugged landscape we have in the southwest and along up the west coast of Ireland, where I'm from. And she changes from a stone into a woman over the course of centuries. And the first poem I'm going to read from the book is called Barth, and it's that image of the stone turning into a woman, and it's in the voice of the Cailleach. Barth. Now comes November, my birth time, and white ribs of tide uproot the silence of the bay. Today I break from stone onto sand, motherless, my mother a stone bedding the earth and dreaming my image. I stretch like a snail from a deep sleep, my flesh gathering its warm fabrics and unknitting me from this womb. I listen and mimic the flood tide, open my ears to the haul of shells, sheer salts erupting my birth cry. My eyes lift as the day begins to shape itself, light being emptied into it as a soft fall of rain sweeps my moss-lined palms. I tread into this soaked brightness, bogland and the air full of fuchsia. This is the blood and bone of my mother, sheets of grass and weed, all her flushing skins I lean on with my hands and knees. Feeling a thirst gently pull, I bring my mouth to the fall of water from a leaf to taste the cool, plentiful drops. I shake the drench from branches, my limbs and lips moving fluently, the way a full throat learns to move for its earliest swallowing. And the Cailleach has kind of stayed a little bit in newer poems that I've been writing, even though I've gone back to writing about my family more so now. And this is called Townland. And a townland is kind of a small, more often than not, a small area of land. And here in Beara, a lot of the townlands haven't really made it onto maps, but they're very important locally and are passed down, you know, from word of mouth and things like that, and you kind of know your own local townlands. And the place that we are here is called Garth, and it just means field. And my father appears in this poem as well, after an aunt of ours had died, and he got an awful fright. So, Townland. A hankering in the skull, uttered and worked, the stagger of heather beds cleaved in the throat, Garth and Ahabrook, and in the old stone walls the swallows going like wind-borne rumours. An ordinary night, my father walking there thought he'd heard the ghost of Nora Sear, the border stream swelling to the sound of her steel crotch tapping out the hours. Old homes and a half-remembered word of mouth, we'd prowl the lanes ourselves, calling her out, the underground all moan and winnow, with disappearing streams and passages that swept the yellowing firs. Unlistened for, the roofless village 1,000 times past, and beyond, the fall of banked moss, the waning lift and turn of a gate, and all of us listening. And this is called the Mining Road. We live just near the old Allies copper mines, and there's beautiful walks up the hill behind us. And I wrote this after my grandmother became unwell about 3 years ago, and it actually seemed to be the year of the Cailleach. The daycare centre had a project going where all the elderly ladies, including my grandmother, were knitting a big cardigan that would be representative of the Cailleach, because she was a giant of a woman, and it was the year for the elderly as well. And she was involved in this project, and after she became unwell, my mother had a dream that she met my grandmother, her mother, at the top of the hill, and she had the cardigan, and she said, oh no, they don't know how to knit properly in there. And she was unravelling the cardigan and knitted it back together herself, and the work was healing her wounds. So, the Mining Road. Where moss is gold in the copper pools, my mother dreams her mother on the road, sitting up ahead among whistled reeds and ocean steaming rocks. Up and out of her hospital bed, her wound stitched and silvering beneath her nightclothes. Quietly, she slips her cardigan off and starts to unravel it, both hands working and steady until she has teased it apart completely, and begins again. Famine Road, Mine Road, Moss Stitch. Like grass swallowed down a shaft, the wool quivers up again towards her lap, her eyes cast down, needles tapping out the work, its strangeness, until it heals her, the old movements long clenched and deep in her hands. I dream them now together in mountain light, leading each other where the road winds down and carries on, past where they thought it would end. And this is another grandmother poem, and different grandmother, and kind of a Cailleach poem as well, because she had more of the Cailleach in her, I think, than anyone else, any other woman in my life. My grandmother lived in the house with us when I was growing up, and my grandfather had died before any of us were born, and I was always curious as to what their life together was like, what she was like as a married woman and what he was like. And apparently he was very mischievous and would play tricks on her and take the mick out of her, and she wouldn't stand for it at all. So this is after he had said something like, they were coming home from Cork and they were passing there by Ballylicky, where there's always swans swimming there, and he said to her, Rita, you'd make a beautiful swan. And she didn't like it one bit, and this is post the swan. Love stories. And when they fought, my father said, in those daylit, lamplit rooms, him bowed into the ceremonies of the newspapers. The sound would be of her slamming closed the cupboard doors, the front door, cups and plates smashed into the deep sink like a sudden downpour of hailstone. He would turn the pages very slowly, so as not to disturb her, and mindful of knives where buttery spuds still plumed on the blade. And once, peering over the rim of the page, he calmly offered, "Would you prefer a hammer?" so that the whole thing started up again. For 3 days and nights, hinges turned over the world. Soft mortar crumbled somewhere down behind the dresser, and from the eaves the nesting starlings darted and sprung in fright, and raised the weathered roof like a sparking flare. This is called Antique Cabinets. It's one of my own love poems, because I got married last week. So this is what I will marry into. Night drives to dig out cast-offs from a skip. The long sweated hall, as if we had coaxed and pulled a sleepwalked body back home and set it up again in our own rooms. Or another you saw at the back of a shop, found its own purchase and worked on you. You said the shine of it was like looking down through water, down past old wood, a poplar sky or walnut's bird flower. And what would I make of such an inheritance? When you were gone, and I am left wondering what should keep of love and trees and shadows, I imagine myself not surprised to find the settled world steady among your things. I wrote a long poem called Man Engine because there is an old abandoned man engine up in the copper mines, and when I was researching about the mines for a few of the poems in this book, I read that the miners went to about 280 feet below sea level, and I thought, that's a poem in itself, just thinking about it. You don't even have to write anything about it to think of all that work going on underneath you without you knowing about it. And I believe in things having happened once, they're still happening, they're still there. So this is part of a longer poem called Man Engine, but this little bit is called Sea Level. We always knew they were mining below the sea, under the great bellies of the earth. Could hear sometimes far out beyond the pier the inconsolable hammering of those workers ossify in the tides, the fill of their shovels streaming above them in candlelight, towards crescent moon or starfish, where I wade in the grey water, the drag of my feet hauling clouds of shingle and ore along their dressing floors. This poem is called Safe House, and it's not a story from my own family. It's on loan from a friend of mine, and she told me this story a couple of years ago, about 2.5 years ago, when all the reports were coming out here about what had been going on with the abuse of children. And when she told me this story, it resonated for me about what happens to the child in the poem. Safe House. When they were beginning to build a country, some of the men came to hide in a house where there was a family and a child upstairs listening. They told him what to say if anyone ever asked. Say they were never there. Say there was only a family in that house. And during the night the boy went to the room where their bags and belongings were hidden. He felt along the canvases, the mouldy wet and sag of the straps. His fingers touched on papers and coins and lifted out the revolver, its coolness and the weight of it in his hands. Then he felt nothing. His blood crept slowly and dark along the floorboards, underneath them, and the room shook and stood still and seemed to hang for a moment in that night. When they found him, they cleaned him, his face, gently and quickly, and his mother wrapped him in a blanket and took him out to a corner of the farm and buried him. Back in the house, they gathered his things and built up a fire again in the kitchen, burning his clothes, his shoes, all the signs and small clumsy turnings of a child. And afterwards, in the freezing dark, the father went out to find the doctor and the parish priest to tell them what had happened and what they should say if anyone ever asked. Tell them there was never a child. Say they were never there. There was never a home or the found easy measures of a family. There was never a map that could lead back to or out of that place, foreknown or imagined, where the furze, the dark-rooted vetch, turned over and over with the old ground and disappeared. And this is called The Glimmer Man, and it's just a little ballady kind of poem. The Glimmer Man has kind of taken on the aura of the boogeyman and kind of something spectral, I suppose, in Irish psyche, because my grandparents would still kind of threaten us with the Glimmer Man. And the Glimmer Man during World War II, during the emergency here in Ireland, he was the guy that would come around and check to make sure you weren't using up your ration of gas, and if he could see even a glimmer of light from the gas range or anything like that, he'd shut you off. So it's actually a love poem, but a poem of comfort as well. The Glimmer Man. Let the light burn down, love. The night falls now. He's not on the road, not yet in the town. Come away from the door, let the light burn down. Or sit by the window where the lamplight shone, all of your beauty a glimmer, all of the darkness gone. Let the light burn down, love, let the light burn down. And there must be light enough, for I can just make do. The sweeping of your footfall, the softness of your mouth. Let the light burn down, love, let the light burn out. That's it. Just as my stomach started rolling.
Okay, this was good. I forgot to put this on. So just in case there's a problem, will you be
Do it
okay
again?
about me doing it
Yeah,
again?
no, I feel much better now actually having done it.